Good evening, everybody. Thank you so very much for joining us tonight. We've got people coming in. We want to get our guests admitted, and then we will get started very shortly. So, welcome to our last pre election summit for our Voting in Troubled Times series. This is the final dash. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good evening, everybody. As dark as it is outside, it's evening. Good evening, everybody. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us for the last in our pre election series of Voting in Troubled Times. Tonight, we are going to be talking about what we are all literally experiencing right now, the final dash toward what will very soon be the 2020 elections, and that election will be one for the history books. We have two amazing guests, and they will each bring you their own perspective on what this final dash looks like. And we're just going to see wherever Gabby takes this marvelous conversation. I'm Andrea Miller, and what I'm going to do right now is a very quick update on where we are with the Reclaim Our Vote campaign. Now, most of you know we ended our postcarding on October 1st, and our final count is 6,400,182 postcards sent to voters in our 8 target states. Now, we also made a lot of phone calls last week. As a matter of fact, we made 119,000 phone calls to our target states. And this week, Mississippi phone banks went up. So, to all of our phone bankers, please go out and show the great state of Mississippi love. Now, total phone banks for 2020. We crossed the million phone bank or phone call mark last week. So, congratulations to everybody on our phone bank team. And if you've been thinking about phone banking, come and join us and be part of our history, because we are still calling and we will be calling right up to 5 o'clock on election day. Now, some other projects. Earlier in the year, I talked about that we were going to use geofencing as one of our methods of outreach. We launched the geofence campaign late last week, and we are targeting 8.8 million students, faculty, and staff in universities in Alabama, Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Texas. We have state-specific ads for every one of our campaigns. And then we are also advertising our election protection tool. See something, say something. And this geofence campaign is designed to run all the way up to election day. So this is a massive turnout effort. So if you look at our phone banks, 1 million phone calls, you look at what we've done with postcards, 6.4 million, 7.4 million plus 8.4 million. We have done outreach to 16 million people, and that is not even counting the 3.3 million people who are going to be part of our texting program. And this is really the first time I've actually added up in my head, and I am absolutely amazed. We have done outreach to nearly 20 million people, and the election isn't over. We are still going to be adding to our numbers. Now, billboards. So many of you have donated so generously to our billboard campaigns. I always think it's fair to show people where their donations have gone. So we have billboards all over the great state of South Carolina at cvotes.org. Voting problems, see something, say something. We also launched the Notorious RBG. The Notorious RBG on Thursday was at Stone Mountain in Georgia, and I can imagine some Confederate generals literally turning over in their graves. And it's like, when women make up their minds, we can and will do anything. And then here's the Notorious RBG in South Carolina. She is in South Carolina right now, and she will be going to North Carolina tomorrow. So there's the RBG under one of the billboards. And I just couldn't help thinking as the RBG goes by, the billboard is waving. It's like, that's my baby. Look, my baby go down the road. People are signing the RBG. We've got signatures.
Andrea, can you speak up a little bit?
In South Carolina, we have Souls to the Polls. These are our car magnets. We have billboards all over the great state of North Carolina. And we are launching mobile billboard trucks in Texas, Florida, and North Carolina. So you can see something, say something is part of our big push as we get closer to election day, and more people are reporting that they are having problems voting. We are documenting all of those problems so that after the election, we can look at all the different voter suppression things that happened and then work on a legislative fix so that we don't ever go through this again.
Bravo.
And then, yes, people going, yes. And the see something, say something sign. And this is what see something, say something looks. I took a picture of the map right before we started this presentation. Now, this is what we looked like in terms of reported incidents of voter suppression. And it's only October 21st. We still have a number of days to go. Every one of these incidents is logged into a database, and all those colors allow us to analyze what type of incidents occurred and how many occurred. The next stop for Center for Common Ground and the Reclaim Our Vote campaign will be a constitutional amendment where we can actually end voter suppression once and for all. And the amendment is going to read something like this. Every citizen of the United States of voting age who shall have the fundamental right to vote in any public election held in the jurisdiction in which the citizen resides. Congress shall have the power to enforce and implement this article by appropriate legislation. So many of you who made phone calls, sent postcards, texted, who were support states and not target states. On November 5th, we are all target states as we begin the work to amend the Constitution one and done in 4 years. That means through the US House, the US Senate, signed by the new president. Yeah, I said that. And then ratified by 38 states, one and done, so that in 2024, voting is truly a right. And I'll say a little bit more about that later on. So right now, I'm going to stop my screen share. I am going to pass the mic over to Gabby, who will begin our incredible discussion tonight with two marvelous leaders. So Gabby, take it away.
Thank you, Andrea. As always, I'm so proud to be part of this organization. Every time I hear your updates, I'm just awed. So good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. And to our volunteers, I want to give you a special shout out, especially those of you who are part of our over 30,000 volunteers with Reclaim Our Vote. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Without you, we wouldn't have these incredible numbers that Andrea just shared with us. So it's no understatement to say that this election has been unlike any other. I know that's something we say every election cycle, but this one has been particularly unique. And it's unique for a variety of reasons, but primarily because it stands at the intersection of a highly infectious pandemic, a collapsing economy, and a time of great unrest. I was looking back on my notes from when we began the series, the Voting in Troubled Times series. It was May 30th. And it was the first day, it was the day after the first of the Black Lives protests. And at that time, I remember like looking at the numbers related to COVID. And at that point, there were 103,000 dead in comparison to today when we're looking at numbers well over 220,000. And over this time, what we've seen is that many of those who passed were disproportionately older, African American or Latinx. Also the same who are being targeted with many of these voter suppression tactics. On the issue of the economy, as I said, it's been steadily going into a downspin, excuse me. What we're seeing is that unemployment officially now stands at 12.6 million people. About 40% of these people are never going to see their job, those same jobs that they had, come back. As a result of this, we're seeing growing food insecurity. And before the pandemic, it was already challenging in this country. A little over 10% of households in the United States were experiencing hunger. That was almost 14 million people. Today, after COVID, we're looking at 1 in 4 households in the United States have experienced some form of food insecurity. And then, education, kids who were already falling in the margins at school are now in even deeper trouble. For around 3 million children, March might have been the last time they experienced any formal education, virtually or in person, which is why all of this makes this election so, so important. So on a brighter note, on Monday afternoon, I was looking at reports about turnout, and we were looking at 30 million Americans who had already cast their ballots in states that report this data. And we also saw that over 82.5 million ballots had been requested. This morning around 5 a.m., it was pretty early, I saw that we had reached over 40 million voters. So that's just in 3 days. So one of the things this series we've tried to do is to give you a broad education around all issues voting. We discussed voter protection, electoral systems, what we call the moral imperative, these issues that I just spoke about. Tonight, we look at the final dash before Election Day. And what we'd like to do is to discuss 3 big buckets of issues related to turnout, whether voters are getting what they need, and then this concept, social movements as new activist groups and how they're interfacing. So as Andrea said, we have 2 phenomenal guests, 2 phenomenal activists with an important history of engaging voters, educating them, and turning them out to vote. So please welcome our guests, Lydia Camarillo, president of the Southwest Voter Registration and Education Project and the William C. Velasquez Institute, and Ashley Henderson Woodard, co-executive director of the Highland Research and Education Center. And what I'd like to do is to maybe start looking at the Latinx and the African American communities and what we need to know about how they're engaging in this electoral process. So let's start with you, Lydia. Maybe introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the work you're really engaged in right now with Southwest Voter, and maybe describe some of the biggest challenges you've been seeing related to engaging Latinx voters in this rather challenging moment. Thank you, Lydia.
Well, thank you, Dr. Gabriela Lemos. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you all. And let me first start by congratulating you and every volunteer and all of you for doing an extraordinary work. I don't even have a better word than extraordinary. It's stunning. Congratulations. I think that the work that you're doing and the work that other groups are doing will pay off this cycle. But to share a little bit about what Southwest Voter is doing, I'm not sure if you know who we are or what we're about, but we just take a second just to first say, Southwest Voter Registration Education Project is basically 46 years old. It started with late William C. Velasquez in San Antonio, Texas. And it took some time to actually incorporate as a C3 because Willie Velasquez was part of the leadership that began to look in San Antonio in 1968 about how do we begin to mobilize the Latino community and how do we protect our rights. The LULAC members at the time were most of them lawyers, and they decided that one of the things that was important for them was to model and start the Legal Defense Fund, much like the NAACP, and they started the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund. It was 1968, and the Latino community, Willie Velasquez said, well, I think we also need to do the voter registration, model it after many of the groups, including the NAACP. It took 4 years before, actually more years, until 1974, before we were incorporated because we were blacklisted. Willie Velasquez was blacklisted because he wanted to register Mexicans in Texas. It took the attorney, and I share this because I think all of us need to talk about our history. It took the attorney, Mario Bledo, who was the president of Moldova at the time, and they were across the hall from each other, to go to the Department of Justice to find out what was going on. And that's when he discovered that Willie was being blacklisted. Shortly after Southwest Voter became an official organization, Willie reached out to Congressman John Lewis. And if you look at our organization's name, Congressman Lewis' organization was Voter Registration Education Project. Well, Willie just added the S in front. And, and we haven't changed the name because we think it's part of our branding. What do we do at Southwest Voter? We mobilize the Latino vote, we protect the vote. When we need to, we sue. We have 210 voting rights lawsuits that we have won. Several of them have to do with things like the president in 2018 or 2016 arguing that 3 million Latinos voted illegally, or Texas saying that 100,000 Latinos did not have the right to vote and they voted illegally, and we filed a lawsuit, or on the redistricting or the voter ID or SB4, which is similar to Proposition 187. So I'm not going to get into more than that, so I can begin to have a conversation about what's at stake this cycle, which is part of the mandate for today. You're all very sophisticated individuals involved in this process, so you probably know more than I do, but here's what I can share with you. This is the most extraordinary election, consequential election of our time, because a lot is at stake. It's an election when we are also preparing for redistricting in states. So the state houses are just as important as the U.S. Senate seats and the pathway to the White House. It is clear to me at Southwest Voter that when you have the block vote of progressive voters, when you have the block vote of the Black vote, when you have the block vote of Latinos and other communities, we can literally change the world. While everybody is thinking about what needs to be done in the Midwest so that we can have a number of elections decided, whether it's Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, whether it's Florida. I would argue that we also need to make sure that we work in Arizona, in Texas, and in Georgia. And so I thank you for working in those states, because I think that at the end of the day, with Texas 38 electoral votes, it can become, and it will become, the what I like to call is the firewall to make sure that if any other states are lost by the progressives, that Texas can come forward. So at us, at Southwest Voter, we're dealing with mobilizing the Latino electorate. And we've always thought that part of our best contribution is to contact new voters, voters who have no voting history, so that at the end of the day, we're expanding the electorate and growing the electorate so that they can make decisions about how they're going to be governed, who's going to govern them, and choices that have to do with public policies that impact them and affect them and affects the nation. With the passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, with the COVID, with the racial injustice that has been with us forever, with the killings of Black men and women, Latinos, it's always been here. But all those factors together and the president's insistence that Latinos are criminals and he doesn't like anybody, all of that, plus the work that you are all doing, I think is going to galvanize and excite many voters. I still don't have a good sense in Texas because we've surpassed the 2012 turnout. We're about to surpass the 2016 turnout in terms of people turning out to vote, again, with all the work that you're doing and the work that all of us are doing. But we're not doing it in the way that we used to. The median age of a Latino voter is 22 years old. When you pull out the immigrant communities, which is 27 years old, it's 22 years old. What do we know about a 22-year-old? They care about the world. They care about the environment. They care about the same issues that any voter does, but they require more contact. And for us at Southwest Voter, we believe that by contacting them with live contacts 4 times, we can ensure that they're on a pathway to becoming high propensity voters with the voters the people that we contact. Everybody that we're contacting in Texas and in Georgia and in New Mexico and in Arizona and some in California at Southwest Voter are all voters who, once they vote twice, they're on their way to becoming high propensity voters. But today they have no voting history because they're all new voters. The challenge with COVID is that how do you talk to them when you can't speak to them, when you knock at the door, no one's going to open the door. And if they open the door and you're wearing a mask, those are issues that people are concerned about. Will they answer the phone? Yes, they will, but you're going to have to call them more than 4 times before you can speak to them once. And so it's a long haul, but we believe with the work that you're doing, the work that we're doing, the group that other groups are doing, that Texas will be competitive this cycle. It will add to the value of what Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, South Carolina. And so I think that if I may make a projection, I think the Democrats are going to take the House. I'm sorry, they're going to strengthen the House. They're going to take the Senate, and they may, I don't know yet, because I am worried about what happened in 2016. There were many, many voters that believe in what the president believes in that were not voters before, and now they have a candidate of choice. So we have to make sure that because we're expecting voter attacks, voter intimidation, voter suppression, and an assurance that if it's not a victory that's overwhelming by Biden, we are going to have an enormous fight, similar to what we saw in Florida in 2000. And I don't know if the Democrats are going to do the same thing they have done in the past. The Democrats are gentlemen and gentlewomen. I don't know if that's the right word, but we don't know how to fight in the way that they know how to fight. And so from that perspective, I think there's some issues that we're going to have to worry about. And I'm not sure that I really answered your question.
No, you did it good. No, that's great. So
All right,
Ashley,
so
what are you seeing? And also tell us a little bit about the Highlander Center and all the work everybody's been doing around democracy around the country, and maybe some on the rural aspects of the work that you're doing.
Sure, I'll try to hit all of that. First of all, good
No
evening.
pressure.
No pressure. Good evening, everybody. You should know that I'm a Southerner and a missionary Baptist preacher's daughter, so I'm used to people responding to me when I say hello. So feel free to communicate with me either through waving or through saying something in the chat. You know, I want to make sure I'm in the right spot and that we're having a dialogue and not just a lecture. Talk to me. Good evening, good people. I believe that, like, you know, I organize. I treat people how I organize, right? And part of the work is just making sure that we're treating each other like humans and communicating to each other and in a dialogue to build people power. So I think it's all right and in good fashion to say good evening to you. So my name is Ashley Woodard Henderson. My friends and family call me Ash. I use she, her pronouns. I am a Southern supremacist, some might say. I believe that as goes the South, so goes the nation, is a fundamental fact, not an opinion. I come from the land of the Yuki and the Chickasaw and the Cherokee, also known as Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Hamilton County, Tennessee. And my paid work is through being the first Black woman executive director of a place that you may have heard about before called the Highlander Research and Education Center. Anybody heard of the Highlander Center before on the call? Anybody? I see a couple of old friends. I see you. How many people, this is the first time you've heard of the Highlander Center? Wave at me. Awesome. Awesome. I see you. Well, welcome to the family. I'm about to give you a little bit of a rundown of who we are. So Highlander's been around since 1932. You may have heard it called the Highlander Folk School. You may know of some of our founders, folks like Miles Horton. You may know of some of the folks that have actually participated in programming at the school, like Rosa Parks. Anybody heard that name? Yeah. Not only did Miss Rosa train at the Highlander Center before the Montgomery bus boycott, she went on to, this is the story that people don't tell. She got trained, but she also then served on the board of directors for years. I wouldn't be the first Black woman executive director of this nearly 90-year-old organization if it weren't for her service. Anybody heard of the name John Lewis? Y'all know who he was? Yeah. John Lewis had his first integrated mill at the Highlander Center and was a dear friend and comrade of our people. That's just to name a few. Martin Luther King might have come through once. But what's also real is we're not a living museum. We are actively currently training up and supporting the strategy development of the next generational cohort of folks that will envision and implement the social, like, justice, freedom movements that we're building all across this country, but particularly in Appalachia in the South as a priority as Southern people that built this school. So for 88 years, almost 89 years now, we have been bringing people together across difference to figure out how to save the world through training them on methodologies that we believe are fundamental to being able to save the world, like popular education, where everybody's a teacher and a learner, intergenerational organizing, place and land-based organizing, cultural organizing, right? If you use art and culture and faith and spirit, you'll change policy and practice, and so many others. And so we're still about that work, right? We're still about that work. We've been integral to the labor movement. We've been integral to the fight for democracy in this country. We've been integral to the fight for civil rights and social justice and racial justice in this country, environmental justice in this country. And we continue to be a catalyst for social movements. That's our work. So that's what I do in terms of my actual job. It's a blessing and a privilege to be in responsibility of that institution and that social, in relationship with all of these social movements. But also as a part of that work, we are an active member in the movement for Black Lives. Anybody heard of the movement for Black Lives? Y'all know about InfraBL? You know, it just might be the largest social movement in US history, incidentally. And so if you haven't heard of it, you should check it out. You can see the website at infrabl.org. And I am actively participating in the work of the Electoral Justice Project, which includes a new united front called the Frontline. And so I'm going to tell you in my sort of like landscape analysis that Gabby's asked me to give, I'm going to talk to you both about what I see as a Black woman from the South, and particularly as a Black woman from the Appalachian, like the region within the region, right? Appalachia is a region within a region. and the South, which is the largest geographic region in the United States. It also happens to be where the highest concentration of Black people live, right? So it kind of matters, right? It kind of matters in a big way if what you want to do is, protect and defend democracy in this country. It's definitely going to be critical if you have any sort of racial equity lens in regards to your work, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I see just as a human from those places that's been organizing in this region for decades. But I'm also going to talk a little bit about some of the priorities of the front line, which again is like this United Front project that's been built by the Movement for Black Lives Electoral Justice Project and the Working Families Party to be able to respond not only to the needs of our people right now, but also to be projecting what's coming after November 3rd. How many people are losing sleep at night because you're like, man, I really want people to get out and vote? And I'm anxious, I'm tired, I'm overwhelmed, but I'm doing everything in my power to get the vote out. Is that you? I see you, man. That's me too. That's me too. How many of you are like, man, we're going to do all of that and we still don't know if we know what's going to happen on the evening of November 3rd? Yeah, I get it. I see you. You are not alone, right? How many of y'all are like, oh my gosh, we're going to do all this work and I have no idea what we're going to wake up to and what we're going to do on November 5th? Yeah, same. But guess what? There's some really smart people that are thinking about it. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that too. So I want you to know where I'm driving this train on the front end. That's where we're going. So I promise I might say some things that are going to make you like feel really anxious because you're probably already really anxious. I'm going to confirm some of those things, but then I promise that when I leave you, I will leave you on an upbeat. Okay. You can hold me accountable to it. So if I get at the end and you still are like, oh, Ashley, you didn't make me more hopeful, just remind me and I promise I'll stick the landing, okay? Promise you'll hold me accountable to that? Great.
Yes, ma'am.
Cool, so let's go. So what we know is that Black people and Latinx people are not a monolith. Shocking, right? That there are people in these communities that aren't necessarily trying to vote. And there are people that are in these communities that are being manipulated by the right wing because quite frankly, the Democratic Party has conceded them to them, right? So I think what we're learning is that there's still like a lot of political education to do across communities with poor white folks, with Black folks, with brown folks, with Indigenous folks, with API folks and other folks of color, with working class people, right? There's all sorts of political education that is necessary and it's not unique to any one community, right? So that's a lot of work, right? But let me tell you what some of us have done is we've said, okay, let's build infrastructure to make sure that political education actually happens. And if we don't see it happening in our communities, let's make sure we're reaching out to make sure that infrastructure gets built. So some of the things that we did was build something called Black Men Build. Has anybody heard of Black Men Build on the call? Oh my gosh, check them out. Check out their website. Check out their newsletter that the most recent edition just dropped today. The newsletter is called Wartime. And it's essentially a community of Black men from all over the country who have come together to not only do political education with other Black men across the country about the importance of this particular election, but they're also putting these Black men to work to make sure that the folks that are going to vote actually feel protected and safe because they're there. Right. So they're working with Black women and Black gender nonconforming people all across the country to stand up and say, you know what, we also want to do our due diligence to not only make sure that we're de-escalating these spaces and making sure that folks have what they need, but we also want to bring some joy and culture to the space as well. And so they're partnering with the Movement for Black Lives. They're partnering with the NAACP. They're partnering with a lot of folks to make sure that we're protecting the vote. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the stuff that I'm hearing, even some of the stuff, to be honest, that I saw in the chat. Right. So I know folks are like, raise your hand, wave at me if you feel excited about how many people you've seen standing in lines and going to vote in the early vote.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. A bunch of us. Right. OK, raise your hand if you're like, oh, wow, I didn't expect this many people to be going to do early vote in the South. Wave at me. And wave at me if you feel like that could be a dangerous thing that Southern people are actually going and participating in the early vote. It's OK. You can tell the truth. It's a safe space. Right. Now wave at me if you believe that it's a dangerous thing and you're not from the South. Okay. Y'all can tell the truth. It's okay. It's a safe space. Right. And I imagine that you think those things, not necessarily because you're like a bad person. That's not what I believe. What I believe is that you probably have been told a whole lot of really stupid stories about what the South is and isn't, right? So let me tell you a few things about what I know about the South. The South is the first place that, like, the first abolitionist newspaper was written in the South and published in the South, right? The labor movement wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the Southern Freedom Movement. You wouldn't have the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act had it not been for the South, right? So let me just tell you about the long legacy of resistance. Southern Black people are the most votingest people in the world, right? And Southern Black women in particular have been saving democracy every election cycle, right? So I want to give you some of the other side of the coin here, right? That if you want to talk about Appalachia, a lot of people call it Trump country. I want to just note that, like, where's Trump from? Queens, right? Where was Reagan from?
California.
California. Who did we give you? Jimmy Carter, right? So I just want to give you some context about, like, the stories that get told about a region and how we internalize them, and then tell whole narratives about stuff about this region, right? That actually has been on the front leading edge of revolutionary change and radical change for democracy in this country. I just want to be clear about that, right? So in that context, what I want to share is that, guess what? People didn't wait until 2020 to start getting ahead of what we knew everyone else would say about the region. That we didn't come out, that we didn't come out enough, that we didn't build the infrastructure, that we didn't do everything in our power to make sure that we did our due diligence and just concede us to the right, right? So I want to talk about some of these places where you've seen the numbers blow up, right? I want to tell you about how in North Carolina Blueprint has been building one of the most intelligent and effective strategies around electoral justice that I've ever seen in my whole life. And I know I'm young, I'm 35, but that's a long time of a lot of losing elections, right? So let me tell you about how they were smart and paid attention to the fact that early voting, people in North Carolina can vote anywhere in the district. They don't just have to go to their precinct, right? And that's true for a lot of our states, particularly in the South. And so what they did was say, if we know that COVID-19 is real and scary, it's going to keep some of our folks from going out and going to keep some of our folks from being able to work the polls, because typically folks that work the polls tend to be older. They trend to older, right? And we know that there's a threat of white supremacist violence and intimidation tactics that might also keep people from voting. Then the smart thing to do wouldn't be just to wait till the last day to vote, election day, to get our people out. It would be to move people to do early voting and to direct them to particular precincts in the district, since they can vote anywhere, where we party at the polls and we have community safety and we have mutual aid and we make it an event that is not to be missed, right? So it's not shocking to me that North Carolina's numbers have been breaking records, because people have been working. Look at Georgia, right? People are shocked that the numbers are up, but you might remember that Stacey Abrams actually won the election. Brian Kemp stole it, right? So it wasn't that people didn't go vote, right? That's not what happened. What happened is that people did go vote and the right wing stole it anyway, right? And that might feel like a very Southern thing, right? But you also might remember that for almost 4 years ago now, that the people won the popular vote and said that they wanted Hillary Clinton to be the next president of the United States. And that's not what happened. And you might remember that before then, when Al Gore ran for president, he also won the popular vote, and that's not what happened, right? So the tricky thing actually isn't people going to vote, y'all. That's what we're learning in the South, is that we can get people to the polls, right? So what does that mean, Ashley? What that means is that there's actually work to be done, that we have an opportunity to make impossible things possible right now. How do you know that, Ashley? Well, let me tell you about all the things that they told me was impossible in 2020. They told me it was not going to be a thing, that Black people and a multiracial coalition of forces would literally turn this country upside down in conversations about anti-Black racism. And look what happened this summer, right? People told me that physical distancing because of global pandemics would stop us from being able to practice social solidarity. But we've built the largest social movement in US history, building on the legacies of our ancestors and elders, right? They told me that divesting from policing and investing in healthy, sustainable, and equitable communities was impossible. But guess what I've seen, right? I've seen it happen. So what I know for sure, y'all, is that though I promise you, you shouldn't just believe the polls, right? And just the data that I've seen, even with like the New York Times reports in the last 30 minutes, is that Biden is trending up, right? We might not get Texas just yet. There's still work to be done, but I promise you they're working. I know it because I see Lydia's work, right? Ohio, we still got some work to do, right? But like Pennsylvania, the polls look kind of good, right? North Carolina kind of looks kind of good. Florida looking kind of good, right? But I promise you that that won't be the problem, right? The problem will be twofold. One, the problem will be that we still have an incredible number of residents and citizens in the United States that don't get to vote at all, right? So we could, my dad would say, we could major in the minor and flunk the major here. You heard Lydia say that part of the work is to make sure that we're tapping folks that have never been engaged to vote, right? So what does it mean that they're doing everything in their power to keep formerly and currently incarcerated people from being able to vote? What does it mean that they're saying that you have to have papers here, even though you pay taxes here? And just because you are someone who likely was forced to be in this country because of US intervention somewhere else, what does it mean that those people actually are like literally building this country, but not getting to say who represents them? And let me not just talk about my immigrant and migrant family. Let me talk about the fact that I got people who were born and raised in DC who can't vote, right? Let me talk about what it means that Puerto Rican comrades don't get as much say about who governs them as everybody else does, right? So let's get the vote out, because I want to pick my next target, right? I want to pick my next target. I think we all want to pick our next target. I think we all know that there's a difference between neoliberalism, fascism, and authoritarianism, right? These are not the same. And I think we know that we are fighting for a world without fascism and authoritarianism, right? Am I still in the right place, right? That's true?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So if that's the case, then let's get the vote out. But let's not miss the forest for the trees here. There's a whole lot of people that are not being engaged, not because they're apathetic, but because they legally are disenfranchised from the system, right?
Right.
The second thing that I would offer is that the other thing that we're seeing is that we're telling people to vote, and people also have seen all the ways that disenfranchisement has kept them from being able to exercise it. We've told them every election that this one time matters. This is the time, right? And this time it actually really is true, right? It really, really is, right? And so how are we engaging them to know that we recognize that their material conditions might not change overnight? And inoculating them to understand that this will be not an election season like we've ever seen before. How are we in the next less than 2 weeks now, making sure that our people understand that they will go to sleep on November 3rd and likely not know who the next president of the United States is. And then they might wake up on November 5th and still not know. And they might wake up on November 6th and still not know, right? Where are we driving our people so that they can get information that they can trust in a sea of misinformation about what's going to happen? We know that if it's trending, like if the results are trending towards Trump, whether he's actually counted all the ballots or not, he's probably going to say that he won. And we know that's not going to be true, right? So what are we preparing our people to respond to, right? I don't want my people to waste their time fighting over something that's not actually real. What I want them to be doing is being prepared to mobilize when we know what is true, right? So when I think about the work of the front line, we've built a 12-month campaign. Right? We are definitely doing GOTV and encouraging people to get out the vote, right? To go out, to early vote, know that the last day to vote is election day. We're going to encourage people to do that in community with each other, because we're not just trying to exercise one tactic, we're trying to build community power. Relationships is the capital that we have, right? And then on November 3rd, we're going to continue to make sure that we're paying attention to the patterns, right? And we're going to keep saying, get out the vote. And then as soon as the polls everywhere have closed, we will immediately start saying, count every vote, count every ballot, count every single vote, and do not call it until we know, in fact, who the people decided should be the next president of the United States, right? And then once we've done that, there's 1,000 scenarios that might be happening all at the same time, y'all. But I can promise you that the front line will be a space led by the largest social movement in the United States history, in a multiracial, multi-sector united front, are going to be paying attention and giving marching orders to our people to mobilize, right? So pay attention to when and wheres. But what's real is the work doesn't stop there, right? Once we know who's gonna be at Pennsylvania Avenue, our work doesn't stop. In fact, some of the most important work begins, right? So what does it look like for this incredible body of people who have made impossible things possible? When people hear the numbers that you all have moved in the last 3 weeks, they don't believe it, right? Because y'all made an impossible thing possible. So let's keep that going with the front line, right? Like, what does it look like to join that force of organizations and coalitions all across the country to say, you know what, regardless of who's in the seat, we have a plan for the first 100 days. We're going to fight for the Breathe Act. We're going to fight for the Thrive Agenda. We're going to fight for the People's Charter. We're going to fight for the Green New Deal, the Red New Deal, the Red, Black, and Green New Deal, and we're going to win all of it, right? What does it look like to know that we will be the people that usher in the 21st century Civil Rights Act of our time? Right. That's on us, right? And if we just focus on E-Day and we don't think forward to January, to inauguration, to the first 100 days, then we're actually conceding people that are ready to be absorbed. I told you that M4BL is now leading the largest social movement in US history multiple times tonight, because what that means is that there are now 26 million people, most of whom are new to our movements, who are ready to be engaged. They are ready to be engaged, and it is our responsibility to make sure that they feel open and welcome and belonging, and that they know that they have meaningful work to contribute to our work, right? To our movements. And so I'm excited to be one in the number on this call tonight, because what I can tell you is the gospel of the social movements, the gospel of the Southern Freedom Movement, the gospel of the South, the good news, right? Is that our people, as they always have been, are working and striving and contesting for power, including electoral justice. And they are moving out in numbers that we have not seen before. And that doesn't mean that white supremacists and the right wing are not also contesting for power, right? The story of the South isn't that like these poor Southern people are just really pitiful and they're trying so hard, but these white people in the right wing are just beating them up so bad, and they just, you know, they have so much power and there's just nothing these social movements can do. The story is actually that we are building the largest social movement in US history. You don't get the largest social movement in US history and not have the South. And that's why you've seen the numbers be so high. I think the work that we have to be committed to is making sure that those numbers count, y'all, that every single person that goes to vote not only recognizes, especially with mail-in ballots, that their work isn't just to drop off the ballot. It's their job to make sure it's perfect. And it's their job to make sure it's tracked. And it's their job to make sure that it makes it to the final number, right? So I'm going to say this and then I'm going to stop. For those of you that have been prioritizing talking to people in your communities, your neighborhoods, your churches, your mosques, your synagogues, the club that you go to, whatever it is, your family, your friends, and you're doing the mail-in ballot thing, that's awesome. Thank you so much for your service and thank you so much for your vote. But what's real is the job isn't over once you put it in the box, right? We need to make sure that we are informing our people to track every ballot that they put in the box and to fix everyone that the state or the Board of Elections and whatever, whoever it is where you are, says needs to be cured, right? So I saw some folks asking about curing in the chat. I think that's an absolutely important and fundamental question that we need to be answering and telling our people about right now, right? Right now, before we get to where everything's going to be chaotic, right? Unless we win it outright, right? And then the last thing that I would say is for our folks that go to vote and are misinformed that they have to vote on provisional ballots, which we know will be a tool of voter suppression all over the country, right? They'll go, and because they're wearing a t-shirt, they'll be turned away. All of the things that we know will happen. We need to make sure that our folks, especially they're going to be poll watching or poll working, know to be intentional about pushing as hard as we can to make sure that as many of those folks that are being pushed to provisional ballots actually get to vote outright, and then for those provisional ballots to also be counted, right? Those are some of the big things that I would add to what my comrade Lydia has already so eloquently said. But I promised you I'd land with some good news, right? And I've already told you a lot of good news. You should have been shouting already if this was a sermon. But let me give you one last thing. What I can tell you for certain, if the numbers isn't the thing that got you excited, if the polls are the thing that gets you excited because you've lived through one too many elections to be fooled by that, then what I can tell you is that I believe, can I just be honest with you? Can I be honest?
Yes.
I actually think we could win this thing outright, y'all. And you know why I believe that? I believe that because I believe this election to be a referendum. And I believe 2020 to be a year of reckoning. I believe we could win this thing outright Because when we held the Black National Convention, the first since 1972, over 500,000 people engaged, right? Because of the numbers that y'all are seeing, because of the work that grassroots communities have been planning and national organizations have been supporting all over the country, I truly believe our people, I trust the people. I trust people to know that enough is enough. And I trust people to know that when our ancestors and elders said by any means necessary, they meant by all the means, up to and including the vote. So I believe we could win this outright. And I believe that if the right tries to steal that from us, I believe that our people are ready to mobilize to build a new democracy like we've never seen, the one that we've always deserved, not just the one that we've conceded to. And I'm excited to get to that finish line and see all of you there.
Me too.
Woohoo.
So yeah, I'm ready. Let's go. So we don't have a lot of time left. We have about 7 minutes, let's say 5, so that we can also do a little wrap up. So you both talked about social movements. You've both talked about electoral politics. And I often think about these as having tensions between them. So maybe a brief thought on, as you look forward, how essential are electoral activities, or even not just essential, but appropriate to social movements and vice versa? Just some brief thoughts on that. Let's start with Lydia, and then, maybe 2.5 minutes each.
Well, first, I want to thank Ashley for making us, inspiring us, and recognizing that there's work to be done, but there's also a light at the end of the tunnel. Let me say that I think there is no real conflict between the electoral and the movement. It's that sometimes we think we're two different worlds and we're parallel to each other instead of conflicting with each other. But I think that if we've learned anything in this last 4 years, and certainly my experience is more obviously with the Latino community, but it's every time I think about the undocumented that marched, particularly in 2006 when we had the largest marches and they were at risk of being deported. And it was the undocumented that stood, and then they stood again with the Black Lives Matter. And I had signs that said, "I'm a dreamer and I'm with you, the Black Lives Matter." That to me was an extraordinary time for us. Now, within my community, the Latino community, we keep asking ourselves, and I know somebody asked me about a year ago, should we organize a march? Much like what happened in 2006, when in Los Angeles, there was 1 million people that marched, in Dallas, 500,000, and there's not that many people, that many Latinos, to have Chicago, igual, New York, other places. And I said, I don't think we're gonna get there. We're gonna end up not having anybody show up, at least not at the level, because now they're getting deported and people are afraid. But in spite of that, I'm inspired that they're involved in the electoral politics, because we all know, and I know Gabriela and I have been involved with other groups to figure out how do we save the children from those cages. If you and I had done that, we'd be in jail and they throw the key to Mars, because we're abusing children, and it's being done by our own government. And it's being done under the cover of light about protecting America, which is even worse. And the second thing that's worse is that it bothers me to say that America is supposed to be the country that promotes democracy, when it conquers and violates other countries, and then they're wondering why people are coming to try and make sure that their kids have a future. So those are the kinds of things that I think we have to think about. We have to think about electoral politics, and immediately, no matter what happens on November 4th, and you're right, we're not going to have an answer on the first day. If it's a massive turnout of people that care about the communities that we care about, that it may be game over on that night, because there will be some states that you can count like that, including Texas. But if it isn't, we still have to organize and be prepared to demand on what we want, because we are not going to have an absolute answer. Electoral politics at Southwest Voter is about empowering our communities and allowing our communities to have a real voice. And we're not there yet, folks. It's about an election. It's about redistricting. It's about political power. And it's about making sure that everyone that we love and care about are treated with respect and dignity. And we are not there yet, folks. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. Ashley, Ash.
I'll try to keep it tight. I mean, what's real is elections aren't won without good organizing. So what's real is like, I hate to say this because y'all are doing a really incredible work, but what's real is that part of the reason that people are going out is because of work that organizers did, right? It's not just a phone call and a text message that engage people enough to get them to go and put their lives at risk for the sake of voting, and both at risk because of COVID, at risk because of white supremacist violence and the threat of it, the risk of the state interventions, right? Like all of that happens because of good grassroots organizing, right? More people are going out right now because of work that we did since March, for work that we did since 2014, 2012, work that has been happening since the 60s and the 50s, work that's been happening since the 30s and the 40s, work that's been happening since the 1800s, right? None of us are the first, last, or only to do this work. So I want to be straight up to the point of the tension. I think part of the point of the tension is folks not recognizing that. Is that, if I only hear from you in 2020, and particularly as a Black person in the last few weeks, like 2 weeks before the election, if all of a sudden then you want to call me, then you want to text me, then you want to come to me with your hand out saying, let's be in solidarity with each other, do this thing that I think is in your best interest, then you might imagine it. I mean, I like metaphors. I like metaphors a lot. So I'm going to use a metaphor. Let's imagine it's like a love affair, right? Imagine how you would feel if you were into me, and let's just say you were into me, right? I hope I have your enthusiastic consent for this extended metaphor. So let's say you wanted to date me, and I said I was into you, that I actually really care about you and your interests, that I want to change your material conditions. I want to, like Beyonce said, upgrade you, right? Right? So let's say that I said I was into it, right? And you were like, cool, let's go. And then you didn't hear from me for 3 years. But then right before something that was important to me was about to happen, I called you and said, hey, like, can I get your commitment to do this thing from me? You'd probably be like, girl, I haven't heard from you in 3 years. What do you mean? What you asking me for now, right? Even better, if you had been in the streets for the last 6 years, or even for the last 6 months, and you hadn't seen my face, if I didn't know, if you couldn't recognize me in the crowd because my presence wasn't consistent, then you might be a little frustrated with me if I then came with my hand out asking you to do something that I was saying was your best interest, but was really what I thought was the best for you, right? So I think what's real is that we've come leaps and bounds since some of those tensions actually, I think, have come to a head in the past, right? I think we've seen a shift around people's understanding of elections, not just as electoral work, but in the framework of electoral justice because of folks like Kayla Reed, folks like Rukia Lumumba and Chokwe Lumumba, folks like Jessica Bird from 3 Point Strategies, and so many others, Maurice Mitchell, right? So many people that are like, you don't get elections without social movements, and you don't have strong social movements that are winning progressive policies without electoral justice, right? I think we've come leaps and bounds, and I think that's also why the numbers are higher than they've ever been, right? So I would close it with saying, whose narrative does it serve to continue to perpetuate this idea that there is some big tension between the vast majority of social movements in this country and election and folks that do election work? It's just not really true in the same way anymore. Now, on the grassroots level, absolutely. There's people who are like, F elections, right? That's gonna always be true, right? We're not always gonna have ideological purity about electoral work, y'all. It's just never gonna happen. I wish it could, but humans are human, right? So what's real though, is that there are hundreds of thousands, in fact, millions of people who are like, again, by any means necessary, means by all the means, even if voting isn't the single tactic that will get us to liberation. It's never any single tactic. Direct action isn't going to be the only tactic. Organizing and base building isn't going to be the only tactic. Policy and advocacy isn't going to be the only tactic. Direct services is not going to be the only tactic, right? It's all the tactics in our tactical toolbox that are going to get us to that beloved community that we've always deserved. We've got to stop pretending that we know what's in the best interest of the people and trust the people to be able to articulate their best interests. And if we don't believe that, if we don't, we maybe don't have alignment there. Then what we've got to do is build the containers in which we can do the political education work that gets them there. I was taught by Southern Black people to meet my people where they are, but not to leave them where I found them. And I can do that without being judgmental, because what I know is it is never, ever the people's fault that they vote for someone that you disagree with. It is always because there are people who are funding that to happen by the billions of dollars. There are people that are making that happen by lying to our people, right? You call the South Trump country, you call Appalachia Trump country, not because people didn't vote in their best interest, comrades. People absolutely thought that they were voting in their best interest because of what people told them, right? And guess what? That happened. And we didn't know who y'all were, right? Because all that territory had been conceded. They're right. They're going to be red states anyway. So what happens when we believe that we can make the impossible possible, y'all? I think, again, that the good news is that we've seen what happens when we invest in the places that are forgotten and neglected, that we actually can fool around and win. Because like Lydia said, those people are ready, waiting for us, looking for a place of belonging, and we'll find it in the vacuum of the absence of our leadership if we don't. So I believe that we've got 2 weeks, good people, to do that good work. And I think that I see, based on the incredible PowerPoint that Andrea showed us earlier, that y'all are in that good work and committed to it. My hope is that you continue to engage it so that come next November, my people know you. My people know you. My people trust your leadership. My people are ready to rock with you, and not saying like, oh, wait, this is the person that told me they wanted to date me in 2020, but I haven't seen them. Let's win, y'all.
Oh, I love it. Thank you too. I'm afraid we've run out of time. I feel like we need to do an extended version of this. This has been amazing and gone so fast. So Andrea, why don't you wrap us up?
Well, I'm going to wrap you up by saying, Lydia, Ash, what an absolutely fantastic evening. You must join us when we talk about our vision of where we are going with this, that, as I've always said, 2020 is a milepost on where we are going, and we are not stopping. We will partay, because I believe we will have landslide, again, there I said it, and we will know on November 3rd. So we pivot on November 5th and we look at the future, the people's budget, and again, just elections and economic justice, economic movements that spring from the community to benefit the community. So that's where we're going. Now, for all of our folks who are on the call, we do have some more work to do to get us through the elections. Those of you on the phone, keep going. We need those phone calls. We are rapidly going through our texting numbers, and we are looking for people to help us protect the election, especially if you are in a target state. So we do have teams that are working to monitor what is in See Something, Say Something. So again, I'm going to leave it at that. I am going to say, Lydia and Ash, thank you so very much for an amazing evening. And we are going to have to get together on these democracy centers, because everything that you touched on, community building, community empowerment, that's what we want to join you in doing. And we come with some tools and some major things that we can invent. Frankly, we can invent any digital thing that you want, and then we can make it available to communities. Text percent, we wrote it, it's ours. See something, say something, we wrote it, it's ours. So this world will belong to us, and we take that first step in defining what our new world, our new just world needs to look like.
Andrea, please unmute everybody so we can properly thank them for this fabulous program.
All right, I certainly will. And we're going to do that. And then, you know what? They've taken away, I have mute all. They took away my unmute all. Jeez, what is wrong with these?
Thank
people?
you.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you.
there's all your waves. There's all your waves.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much.
So much.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
Wow.
We're so grateful to you.